Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be joining us from. You are listening to the Beyond Healthspan podcast, the podcast that strives to decode longevity research to enhance health span. We focus on more than just aging, as we'll explore some fascinating science that kind of shapes the future of human health, some of our advanced strategies and breakthroughs that impact both quality of life and holistic well-being. But I am Brandon, I'm from the coaching team, and I have my good buddy here and colleague Rich, part of the research team, the clinical team, the coaching team too, and we're excited about the opportunity to dive into our topic of discussion this week. And so, with that said, we launch what I would consider a mini series, Mitochondria 101, and a little bit deeper dive into that. So, I know this is a topic that comes up very, very regularly for Rich, myself. So, Rich, if you want to share like why you think this is one of our favorite topics, mitochondrial
Absolutely.
health, mitochondrial function, rock and roll.
Excited to be back. Great to see you as always, Brandon. Although I see you most days of the week, I don't always get to see you in this exact venue. So great to be here. Like Brandon said, mitochondrial health is a favorite topic among the team working at Healthspan, but also the people that we work with, clients, patients, members. It comes up all the time, and for good reason. It makes sense. There's definitely data that we have to at this point. One of the more recent updates, there was a 2022 study suggesting that less than 8% or less of adults are metabolically healthy. Lab markers, lab values, glucose, lipids, cholesterol, biomarkers like blood pressure, if they're out of range, that's a clear indication that you might have some mitochondrial health deficiencies and they might be worth addressing. And we're constantly working with folks to help them address that, either through lifestyle or protocols, change agents, supplements. I'm excited about this. This is something that we focus on a lot. I'm looking forward to our discussion today. The great thing about mitochondria, just for setting the stage, they're highly sensitive to positive habit and lifestyle changes. If you're listening now and you're aware of some biomarkers or some things you need to improve upon, you're in good company. Like I had said, less than 10% of adults have pristine, perfect metabolic health based on the standard criteria for metabolic health being met. But if you have some stuff you want to work on or improve, you have a lot of capacity and power to do that.
What if you are unaware of biomarkers or have any kind of ability to check in regularly on some of these biomarkers, and which biomarkers would you loop in to be the ones that you would put your eyeballs on the heaviest?
Yeah, if you're unaware of your biomarkers, or it's been a little bit since you got some lab work done, what does your day feel like on an energy side of things? Afternoon slump, if you're kind of getting that lull in your energy levels, or you're feeling a little bit flat, unmotivated in the afternoons pretty consistently, if it's impacting your daily life or your work performance, there's probably an opportunity there to focus on your metabolic or your mitochondrial health. During our chat today, I think we'll get into some of the ways you might be able to address that, and then even some more evaluation techniques, if you will, from like the real expensive scientific research based stuff that for the most part is limited to the research sector, all the way to like, things that might be more clinically applicable or clinically accessible, and even, survey that you can use, things that you can use just to kind of check in more frequently without having to do the invasive stuff.
What would you say is like a frequency for somebody that should get a basic CMP, complete metabolic panel, any other kind of, you know, base level markers? What's the frequency that you would recommend somebody to do that if they were concerned about improving their mitochondrial health or assessing where their mitochondrial health is right now?
Definitely, health span generally, we're focused on optimizing health span. So we are probably looking at quarterly labs. And in that context, mitochondria improvement you can see pretty quickly, especially if you're consistent about building habits and you're being pretty selective and targeting the right protocols to help augment and improve your lifestyle habits. So I would say quarterly labs. We'll talk a little bit about like what biomarkers to focus on and some things, but definitely the annual visit, one time a year lab focus, it will work, but I don't know that it's as it's not frequent enough for you to actually be able to action and see that change on to kind of keep yourself motivated, maybe refine and tweak your direction if you need to along the way.
Yeah, I think 3 months is like if you were commit to X or Y or Z, whether it's nutrition or exercise or sleep or stress management, I think that's probably a pretty accurate amount of time to at least make some kind of assessment. Yes, this worked. Yes, this helped. No, it didn't work.
If you're focused on health span optimization quarterly, like Brandon said, love it.
All right, for today, Mitochondria 101 show goals. What are mitochondria? What do they do? Is it possible that we are overselling how important that they are? You know, we being health span. Why is it important to our health? If it is important, cool. But let's talk about some of these actionable items and how we can increase our own kind of agency in addressing our personal individual mitochondrial health. What is the ROI for investing in our mitochondrial health? And I think an appropriate springboard from that is sans void of any kind of biomarkers. If I said, Rich, I'm feeling X kind of way, what are some symptoms or signs that they might kind of be dysfunctioning or not functioning at the highest level that we would want them to be?
In terms of mitochondria, let's start with agenda task number one, right? So, what are mitochondria is a primary question. What do they do? And then we'll get into like, are we overselling? I think that's a great way to ask it.
I don't think we are.
Mitochondria, the tagline, biology from middle school, high school, memorization fact probably that everyone has in their head when you hear mitochondria. It's the power plant of the cell, the engine, the battery of the cell. That is the primary organelle in your cells where you produce energy. Most of your cells contain mitochondria, but not all of them. Their function is crucial. If you don't have functioning mitochondria, you will have an issue. Energy plants are bogged down. Things won't be running well. Things start to break down a bit. You can kind of think of any motorized, any electric lawnmower. I've got a neighbor who just got an electric lawnmower, and I can hear it when his lawnmower starts running low. It's like just kind of not working like it's supposed to. Anything you want to think of like that as an analogy will work here, where if you're not producing the right amount of energy, and it's very precise based on your energy need, based on what you're doing, the stress you're exposed to, whether it's physical, mental, illness stress, like your body is constantly kind of evaluating energy need, energy that's coming in from food, for example, and nutrition, and then also like what's exiting based on what you're doing, what you're engaged in. So if your mitochondria are not there, they're not up to the task to meet the range of demands around energy that you have in your life, you're going to feel it. There's going to be some symptoms involved.
And you can do too much the other way too. I mean, if you start to go aggressive with some of these supplements with polyphenols, with intermittent fasting, with like you can uncouple very aggressively, and this has been shown. I think Martin Brand was the author on Uncoupling to Survive. And if you uncouple too aggressively, you're just an energy dump. You're an ATP dump at that point. And that was even shown using polyphenols as an example, 2,4-dinitrophenol, 2,4-DNP. People were exposed to that in factories. I think it was during like World War I, World War II, where they were breathing this stuff in and they had like a low grade fever. They were losing weight. And it was like, is this a weight loss drug? And then, you take it too far in that direction and people were aggressively losing weight, getting themselves sick. But coming back to it, there's certainly a balance with all of this. And, more is not better. You don't want to dump all the supplements and take all the things that kind of promote mitochondrial health and exercise, nutrition, sleep, stress management. We're not doing anything novel here.
That's really fascinating, the way they've found that you can be too inefficient. I guess I'd like to dive in, if you don't mind, Brandon. Is it possible these mitochondria that they matter too much, or should we stop off at some of the symptoms that are common? How would you like to proceed?
I probably have a bias that I love when you kind of tangent off on some analogies and metaphors with what comes to your mind. And I know you had a very fun one in terms of what a dysfunctional mitochondrial human might look like.
All right, yeah, I hear what you're saying. So I'll kind of go over some symptoms real quick. Classic symptoms, if you will, of mitochondrial dysfunction. First, fatigue, low energy levels. We kind of touched on that already. Brain fog and cognitive performance can decline pretty considerably, and those are two primary ones. There's mood dysregulation, obviously your capacity for exercise, one, but then also your ability to recover post-exercise, temperature changes, anything that's a stress on the body. If you have mitochondrial dysfunction, you'll notice that the stress is, artificially, biologically, a little bit more difficult to manage than it would or could or should be if you were in a good spot with your mitochondrial health and function. Some of these are a little bit hard to quantify: muscle weakness, age-related decline, just based on like the time frame of measuring age-related decline. It's, keeping up with labs, just trying to stay in tune and stay actively engaged in your health is the best way to track these down. Based on what Brandon had said, when I was kind of just thinking about mitochondrial health, I immediately, for whatever reasons, thought of these symptoms, right? Fatigue, low energy, this brain fog, this fogginess that you live in this cloud of sorts. I immediately thought of Charlie Brown. And
the fact that you teased out the logo on his t-shirt and correlated that to like what a mitochondrial organelle looks like is, I don't know. I'm not quite there.
That happened after the fact. I didn't
It's
even think about Charlie Brown first. I first thought about like Linus, and then I like confused the Linus with Pigpen. Turns out they both are interesting examples to consider here, so I guess we could take a look at those. But yeah, there's this whole analogy around like Charlie Brown and the characters in Charlie Brown, right? So if you think of Linus, like a lower energy, he's the one with the blanket. He's always carrying like his blankie around, a little dazed, kind of dragging this blanket through the day. Seems like a little bit disconnected, just like he has this, this energy kind of lack, or this, he's not really quite as energetic as some of his peers in the show. So I first thought of that, and I kind of again got him confused with Pigpen. So we got kind of Linus, where think about like just being sleep, the sleep inertia. You kind of just feel like you woke up in the morning and you still feel like you could like just go right back to sleep for hours and hours, and you're just like not feeling rested. And many people experience that. We talk to people that experience some kind of formation of their symptoms and things, and not always is it mitochondrial related, but definitely something that people can struggle with is low energy level throughout the day, even when they should feel rested when they first wake up, for example. This oxidative stress or this mitochondrial damage that can occur that kind of bogs down your energy creating ability. Similar in some cases, like the symptomology, maybe a little sluggish. There's some signs of cellular inefficiency, which we could talk about, that might pop up in labs if you kind of have like this pig pen kind of going on where you're not really as efficient, like Brandon had said. Like the people that, you had brought up with some of the exposures they had where they were so inefficient, they had this like their body temperature was high, but they were still losing, they were losing weight. Like Charlie Brown in particular, like mitochondrial burnout, or just like being like he's constantly low mood. This is kind of like what we had talked about with the symptoms, where you've got like some of the mood disturbances or some of like the emotionally heavy feeling. He's trying, but it just seems like and turns out there's like these kids TV show analogies where like Eeyore and Charlie Brown kind of this mitochondrial burnout existence versus like Snoopy kind of embodies someone that's like high energy, emotionally like and energetically's got what he needs to be creative, comes up with these cool things. There's a dog flying planes in the TV show if you're familiar with Charlie Brown. I ended up later on kind of seeing his t-shirt and like the squiggles on his t-shirt. If you kind of isolate that out, it looks like the cristae, or the like inner membrane that they always show, that's kind of got like this zebra style pattern associated with mitochondria, the actual appearance of mitochondria like in a microscope, for example. So it was a fun way to kick off my research into mitochondria, was to try to update myself, because I'm not like a regular viewer of Charlie Brown, I guess.
No,
Brand,
it
yeah.
was a great call out, and I'm very excited for people to see the logo on Charlie Brown's shirt and how that looks like a mitochondria. That's super cool. So we promised ourselves we were going to be a little more actionable and intentional with podcasts and our sharing moving forward. So if we were to take the wonderful analogy that you just kind of pointed out, and I'm still dumbfounded that you were able to articulate and figure that out, but a little mitochondria theater. So if we were to help people kind of assess where they are in, again, void of potentially having biomarkers, mitochondria theater, which Charlie Brown character is your mitochondria channeling today? So kind of a fun self-check-in game, and I think you have a handful of questions that if you wanted to run through those and elicit those to people to think about and reflect upon for themselves, so that might be fun.
Sure, yeah, this is mostly in the name of fun, but I think these actually could work as like a little bit of a fun self-check-in. It'd be meant to be quick, where you're gonna have gaps potentially, right? As Brandon had mentioned, if you're gonna be doing some lab work every 3 months, roughly, because you're kind of working on your mitochondrial health and you're trying to optimize. You've got 12 weeks roughly in between those lab markers, where it's good to just stay on top of things. How am I feeling? Maybe you're going to test a few different things. You'll have a few different goals within those 3 months that you're going to like. I'm going to work on this habit, or I'm going to work on adding this protocol, this supplement. I'm going to change dosages around this and this, any number of things. So in that meantime, in the gap period, there's a few questions. So when you wake up in the morning, question number one: are you bouncing out of bed like Snoopy? Do you kind of make your way out of bed, but you need your blanket and quite a bit of coffee like Linus? Do you feel like you're here, but you're just like not able to actually make progress? Nothing, life isn't as shiny. The colors aren't as vivid as you would like them to be, but you're checking off the boxes. You're getting things done like Charlie Brown, kind of just a little bit burnt out. Or do you, kind of like Pigpen, choice number 4. You just kind of wake up out of bed and you just don't feel right. There's like this cloud of dust and things circling around. So I'll try to stop using the name drops and references at this point associated with Charlie Brown. After eating a big meal, you're feeling recharged? Are you ready to go? Are you feeling sleepy? How about bloating or sluggishness that kind of just lasts for a time, maybe in the postprandial 3 to 4 hours after a meal, that you're kind of feeling a little like sluggish, but that does go away? Or do you crash completely like it's after Thanksgiving and you need to take a big long nap? There might be some mitochondrial or some metabolic overlap going on there as well. Brain power throughout the day. Are you sharp, focused? Do you have some waves of clarity, but then you space out, feeling like you're kind of watching life happen through a foggy window? Are you overwhelmed or irritable? Are you feeling tired, but you recover pretty quick? 15, 20 minutes, an hour, depending on how long you were just exercising. If you're like Brandon, you go out for like this half marathon just for fun on a Saturday morning. If you're like ready to go back into it within a half an hour after you return, then that's really good. You check the box there. I feel a little tired, but I'm recharged with no problem. Do you need a nap for a while? Are you sore for days after you exercise? And then do you actually have physical signs, symptoms? Are you sweating like crazy? Are you dizzy or just feeling completely crushed after a workout for a long time with those signs around sweating or nausea, stuff like that? And then finally, the last question, just as a check-in, in general, across daily life, do you feel like it's steady burn, steady supply of energy, not a lot of ups and downs? You're just kind of, you have what you need at any given time, even though your demands, your energy need will shift hopefully as you're like exercising or as you're kind of doing different things throughout the day that may require more or less activity and energy output. Are you experiencing the roller coaster throughout the day where like super great energy levels, super low, and you're just kind of like trying to hold on for dear life? You have just like this slow uphill crawl where you like kind of get out of bed and like you're able to get some momentum going, and then it's time to go back to bed again. You're up, you're down, you're not really sure, and you're just kind of like a little bit more chaotic around your daily energy levels. It's hard to even like kind of place it. So you could see that you might not ask yourself, like for example after a meal, you'd ask yourself after that meal. More than likely you don't have to ask yourself all five of these every day. It's just kind of a check-in, or maybe you don't ask it, maybe you just notice like, hey, I felt a little off after this meal. And maybe sometimes that's the food that you're eating, but if it's just this consistent pattern, there might be something else going on. It might be worth investing in checking on your mitochondria, which I'm sure we'll get into some evaluation, some assessment tools going forward.
Yeah, well, I think that just kind of landed the big question. Are we, Healthspan, putting too much stock in, I guess, assessing mitochondrial health? Is it as heavy as we are saying it is? I tend to believe so. To kind of, I think, take a quick step in history, only about 2 billion years or so ago, it was a little bit different then. There was limited atmospheric oxygen at that point in time, and that was cool for that point in time, but not cool for this point in time. So there were these primitive single-celled organisms that could make energy only through something called anaerobic glycolysis. So anaerobic lack or insufficiency of oxygen, which at that point in time was just 2 ATP per glucose. So not very much. You could get by at that point, enough to survive, but not to really support any kind of complex life processes at that point. So this free-living bacterium capable of something called oxidative phosphorylation, which using oxygen to make ATP, was engulfed by a larger cell. And this ended up being very beneficial for us, and I think has served us wonderfully to present day, a symbiotic relationship, if you will. So instead of being digested, it was now part of the host. So with mitochondria's electron transport chain, each glucose could now produce up to, what did I say before, 2 ATP? Now we're going 36 to 38. So
Yep.
18, 19-fold increase in energy yield meant, now the cells could power far more complex, biomechanical processes. I can go run my marathon and still do it again tomorrow, or my half marathon. Multicellular life could evolve at that point. Energy could be stored more efficiently, and now longer periods between eating meals or exercising or whatever it might be. So the mitochondria transferred a lot of their DNA to this host cell nucleus, but retained kind of their own small circular genome or mitochondrial DNA at that point. And that's, in essence, evidence of their bacterial ancestry at that point. So they were like tenants at that point inside these cells, which you are trading ATP for protection, for nutrients, for survival, to have the ability to do way cooler things than you probably would have otherwise with only 2 ATP for glucose. So a lot of metabolic flexibility, and I know that's going to be an unpopular opinion, and we might get crushed for that, but I think that's something that you and I, Rich, believe in heavily and I think
Yeah.
promotes health span, lifespan, all that fun stuff. So cells can now survive on carbs, on fats, on ketones, and this ATP surplus allowed organisms to have specialized cells, so neurons, muscle fibers, immune cells, do these kind of repair processes. So now we're talking about autophagy. And one of the reasons that we take low dose rapamycin is the upregulation of autophagy and clearing of senescent cells.
I think that very clearly. I appreciate the history lesson in the review, just because I always so cool, like this whole symbiotic
And it's
relationship.
a theory, but I just wanted to
Yes.
point out that
Yeah, it is by far the theory on where did these mitochondria come from. We know the following, right? They're cell organelles. They're basically organs that live inside your cells. The powerhouse of the cell, as we talked about, that's correct. But we should be precise, maybe add a little nuance. You can find these tiny organelles, these mitochondria, throughout the body. They're crucial for maximizing energy production in complex cells, and they're absolutely necessary for aerobic energy production. You still find this, like in single-celled organisms, that there's anaerobic bacteria that are perfectly fine in these areas where there's no oxygen and they can generate energy. They probably don't generate a ton of energy in comparison to what would be possible if they were able to operate and utilize oxygen and mitochondria and some of that. But for example, red blood cells, and you've got a lot of red blood cells in your body, they do not have their own mitochondria, and they are cells, as the name would imply, and they create energy. And it's pretty astounding, actually. The average adult is estimated to have roughly 30 trillion individual cells. This is excluding microbiome stuff, because the microbiome's actually 10x probably what your individual, all the Brandon cells on Earth, or all the Brandon cells he has, is 30 trillion potentially. That would be like what inhabits his gut or some his other microbiome inhabitants that he's carrying around. So there's a lot of symbiosis, I guess, throughout the body in general. And why would the mitochondria be any different? It's kind of this cool relationship where there's mutual benefit, and therefore why digest a mitochondria when you could just keep it around and it'll help you be more metabolically flexible to respond well to anaerobic energy production and be able to do something there, and also have that aerobic blend. But kind of going back to my original point, 25 trillion roughly of the 30 trillion cells that are Brandon are red blood cells. And so a majority of cells in the body actually do not have mitochondria. Mitochondria are crucial. Metabolic flexibility that they convey is crucial. The ability to precisely meet energy demands across a continuum of different inputs or stresses on the body or on the cell are huge. Without them, we would not be the same. That's for sure. Your red blood cells probably be okay, right? If you didn't have mitochondria, your red blood cells would be okay, but all the rest of your cells in your body would be forced to run on anaerobic energy production. Just like Brandon said, that cuts energy output considerably and decreases how much ATP is available. So you would have this energy deficit more than likely. You'd have a decline in some of your cellular function. They've done some cool research around this. I know we have brought up Francis Gonzalez Lima in previous episodes. He referenced some research where they actually used substances, including cyanide, and they were trying to figure out what happens when you basically shut down the energy production capacity of the mitochondria. In this case, they were doing it on mice. They were kind of focused on brain function. They found if you 100% shut down mitochondrial energy production, those animals do not live successfully for very long. You've probably got seconds or minutes, similarly as a human. But when they were able to actually gradually kind of gradate their reduction in energy production at the mitochondrial level, a 30 to 40% reduction actually ends up reducing output in terms of energy in a way that would be synonymous with many chronic diseases. You have memory loss. In his case, he's focused a lot on dementia, Alzheimer's. He kind of pointed that out, which is something that you can see in other studies as well. There's some pretty cool research from 2020 where they were showing that as well. So those are just, I find it fascinating that these mitochondria are so crucial, and even just a slight reduction in their capacity or their ability to generate energy ends up being a part of the etiology to a lot of chronic diseases that we're currently kind of working on all the time.
Well, it's 2025 at this point, so we want to strike this balance between allowing them to work, but also not working them too hard.
Yep.
So, modern, developed today, 2025 society, what do you think wrecks mitochondria the most?
Yeah, it seems very clear. The absolute worst thing that you could do to wreck your mitochondria would be bed rest. They've done bed rest research studies. Many of them, they sometimes use bed rest to simulate the effects of microgravity in terms of what it does to muscle and bone. If you think of it more so on the mitochondrial energy production side, there was a 2010 study, quite fascinating. They only did 9 days of bed rest, but they did some comprehensive gene analysis as well as looked at metabolic pathways. They saw that 4,500 genes were downregulated and 34 different metabolic pathways were associated with this mitochondria biogenesis, function, aerobic energy production were all downregulated considerably.
Do you happen to know were those individuals healthy individuals? Do you
Yes, these
recollect?
were young healthies to start, and we can make sure to share the link or the reference for this study. The author name escapes me, but I know it's a 2010 study. I was looking at it. The cool thing about this study was 9 days of bed rest, right? Altered and degraded mitochondrial function, energy production considerably, but they also included training afterward to basically try to recover these individuals. Within 4 weeks, it looked like about 82% of the genetic detriments, the downregulated metabolic pathways, a lot of the immediate effects of that bed rest were reversed.
Hmm.
But yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts just based on like it takes 4 weeks to come back from 9 days of bed rest, which just demonstrates the importance of not being inactive. Avoid bed rest if you can at all. And then, just moving, taking opportunities to move, daily living opportunities. It's not the worst if you have to get a couple more trips to the car. You don't have to get all the groceries in one trip, I guess. That is moving more, getting more steps, for example, that type of stuff. There is some interesting research that like you don't maybe need 10,000, maybe 7,000 steps, but either way, all of that is super helpful. In addition to that, kind of just thinking about other factors that are not great for what wrecks your mitochondria. I would say like the modern developed society we live in is not especially ideal. Things are for the most part quite convenient, abundant. There's a lot of artificial light. There's round the clock access to this highly palatable, low quality food like products. And over time, those pose a severe threat to your healthy mitochondria. I'm not advocating that everyone needs to be like going back in time to the 1800s or becoming Amish, but there is kind of this tension between some of the advantages we have of modern society, make it too easy not to be active, too easy not to eat whole food, too easy to do some of the things that we know are important. And I'm sure a lot of people in our audience probably are aware of this. A lot of this material.
Yeah, nothing novel here. I don't.
I mean, it's give take though, because like the modern society, technology, etc., the research progression that we've had is actually going to be advantageous to improving health span and lifespan. We've seen that lifespan has basically doubled in the last 100 to 200 years from what was 40, 50 years old to now, around 80 years old. So there's nothing wrong with modern developed society and technological advancements. It's just being strategic about like how you're going to manage it for yourself.
Yeah, and that's I think could be kind of a good plug for working with the coaching team here at Healthspan too, and we look at these biomarkers for pretty much every one of the protocols that we have and set goals and work with you in real time. And as part of the membership plan that we have with the Healthspan coaching team, don't just take a molecule or take a pill or something like that. There has to be some kind of lifestyle adjuvant therapy that's going to substantially supplement and augment whatever your health goals might be.
I would agree. And as we'll get into, I think we're going to dive into some of the evaluation and how you might go about some of that. That opens up opportunities to have a partner that's going to work with you. You can dive into the research and figure out, some cool, unique ways to actually personalize and individualize, approach for you that might be good in terms of targeting your mitochondrial health.
So we talked about some quarterly labs.
Yep.
We talked about the Pigpen, Snoopy, Tigger, Linus kind of assessment tool. Are there other functional things that you would throw out there or gold standards, or where would you kind of rank things if somebody was actually very serious about this? If we can rank it in cost or what you would get kind of bang for the buck or what you can squeak away with without emptying the bank account, what do you think are your top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that you would do?
Yeah, so we can, I guess, try to rank them higher cost, more invasive to lower cost, less invasive. That tends to be a good way to go, and just start with like the most, I guess, precise, the most accurate, also the most expensive or the least accessible things. Gold standard would be like a mitochondrial function measurement that you would actually do a muscle biopsy or you do some work to isolate mitochondria. And then you got to keep those bad boys alive. And you're going to actually do some tests with them where you are going to basically provide the mitochondria different fuels and see how they respond, see how much ATP they generate. This would all be done in a lab. This is all quite laborious in terms of like just isolating the mitochondria out of the muscle after you get a muscle sample.
Ouch.
Incision and yeah, making an incision and like doing a little minor surgical procedure to extract some muscle tissue. So that would be the gold standard. You're going to find that in the research. That's great. I don't know how many people are doing that at home all the time. I think that would be a little bit less invasive, but the cost is way up there. Is doing nuclear magnetic resonance using an MRI or spectroscopy. You can use specific scans in the MRI to look at the metabolism that's occurring in your body in different areas, for example, while you're alive, and there's no cutting or surgical procedures to extract muscle. So again, non-invasive, very costly. That's becoming more common in the literature just because it's really hard to use biopsies to get some of these data points that we'd like. For example, even the labs, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, they're just a moment in time. And unless you repeat the labs associated with different things during exercise or post exercise, like we have some of that data, but it's hard to do. Biopsies are equally hard to do because if you want to see a baseline mitochondrial function and then do some exercise and see what the mitochondria are doing during that time, you have to have someone get more than one muscle biopsy, and so it's just difficult to do. The MR helps a little bit with that. You can do the magnetic resonance, but again, so alternate mitochondrial function test that would be even more accessible down the line here. There's MitoSwab, which is a company that does cheek cell swabs, and then you can actually send those in and they will analyze. They will give you some data on what the various electron transport chain complex 1 through 4 are doing in your mitochondria. And so that's a great option. It's actually been validated in the literature to be roughly 80% plus 84%, if I remember correctly, in terms of like be lining up with what a muscle biopsy would produce in terms of those results. You get 84% without actually cutting your leg open. So MeScreen is another one. They use Seahorse technology, which is super cool. Seahorse technology is like the cutting edge, and they do some really cool work to get a little bit more comprehensive view of mitochondrial function. Very new, so that would need some data, but it is possible you could actually purchase a MeScreen if you're super interested in that. Finally, we go to lab markers. We've made it something that's more common, more that we see more regularly. And when you're looking at lab work, you want to look at specific markers that are kind of selective for mitochondrial function. The ones that are the easiest or most available would be lactate pyruvate and lactate pyruvate ratio. So that's 2 markers, and then you do some division and you get that third one as an extra bonus. So lactate is a byproduct, or lactic acid is a byproduct of anaerobic metabolism. So if you have higher levels of plasma lactate, that means that you're relying more on anaerobic metabolism at your baseline or while you're fasting, etc. Ideally, with these, you want the values to be under 2, so 0.5 millimoles per liter to roughly 2 millimoles per liter or less. If you see at rest your lactate numbers are quite a bit higher than 2, generally that's an indication your mitochondria might be having an issue. Sometimes there's other stuff going on. If you eat like a really, really high carb meal and some other things, you might be able to perturb your lactate slightly. But if it's a fasted thing, then definitely might indicate some mitochondrial issues. With that, the pyruvate is a marker of aerobic metabolism. Normally during fasting, pyruvate range is 0.03 to 0.1 millimoles per liter. During aerobic metabolism, like Brandon had mentioned, you get more ATP per unit glucose. You get more ATP and you have the ability to burn fat completely and use mitochondria. So a nice way to assess whether or not you're getting adequate blood supply, whether you're doing more fat metabolism, which you should, hopefully in a fasting state, hopefully your fat metabolism is upregulated a bit. And then you can look at the pyruvate or the lactate pyruvate ratio, which is a breakdown of your fuel use metabolism. What you want to see basically is a 10-to-1 ratio or 20-to-1 ratio, somewhere in that range. If you're on the lower side of that, that means you're burning a little bit more fat potentially and creating energy from there. If you notice that your lactate pyruvate ratio is considerably over 20, that would be an indication that there might be some opportunity to improve your mitochondrial function. There's not a ton of human data in this area in terms of how you might optimize some of this. I did find some with relation to COVID-19, people that were in the ICU when they had elevated lactate levels or high lactate pyruvate ratios. That was associated with poor clinical option or outcomes. It seemed like people that were more metabolically healthy did fare a bit better when it came to any illness, really, but that one in particular. does give an idea of the blood flow, the oxygenation. So if you have a high lactate pyruvate ratio, that would indicate that you might not be getting blood flow or you might not getting the oxygen. So like, again, with respiratory illnesses or viruses like that, where you have issues with oxygenation, that would be important to keep in mind. There's a couple more, and then we're going to take a break. I want to hear from Brandon a little bit, but we can chat about maybe some exercise assessments. There's some newer values now that you could consider. They're more nice to haves because they're not quite there in terms of being widely accessible, and our research data is not as voluminous around these, but it's GDF15 and FGF21. They show a lot of promise, but they're not perfect. They're kind of, again, nice to haves. I think lactate pyruvate and lactate pyruvate ratio are going to be the standbys for mitochondrial function. And there's obviously some other ones with a complete lab panel. You're just painting this picture basically of like what's going on in the body and trying to get a metabolic assessment, mitochondrial assessment. You can kind of blend that all together, and then hopefully, yourself, based on your research and expertise, or in conjunction with a really awesome coach like my man Brandon here, you would put together a plan to actually address lab biomarkers, some of your energy levels. If you're, got certain Charlie Brown things going on that you want to address, you could get to work, and you'd have a great partner with a great beard to do that.
That's all right. Well, I think it's about time to land the plane and ACTION action. So, if we were to explore maybe two or three actionable items for people to kind of foundationally boost their mitochondrial health, if we can toss some of those out there and then bring it home.
Okay, there's going to be actionable, I guess. I'll preempt this by saying when I think mitochondrial health, I lean exercise as an actionable tool and most bang for your buck or most value. When I think metabolic health as a differentiation point between the two, because they overlap and sometimes you you want to differentiate the two, I think more nutrition first approach. Doesn't mean you exclude in either case. You're thinking mitochondrial health is somewhere you want to invest. Exercise should be a priority, but doesn't mean you just forget that nutrition is important altogether. The same thing for metabolic health. I do think there's some assessments you'd want to do with regard to exercise to get an idea of, working backwards from where you'd like to go, Brandon. But I wanted to just touch on like a VO2 max test would be a great option. I know we've brought up websites like Fitnessity or different websites where you can put in your zip code and kind of like find a place to go get some VO2 max data. But a VO2 max test or a graded exercise test would be a great option. Just the VO2 max number alone gets you a lot of benefits. So again, working from more complex, higher cost downward, you could go to a lab, get a VO2 max test. You do the whole breathing through a tube thing. They'd collect your outgoing carbon dioxide and the remainder that you exhale of the oxygen, and they would calculate your VO2 at any given submaximal all the way up to maximal work rate. But the best thing with that is if you can get that raw data, the table, the spreadsheet of data, where you can actually look at the numbers associated with your volume of CO2, your volume of O2, your respiratory exchange ratio, because in the coach's hands, potentially in yours as well, publications, the formulas are out there. You could actually take that number, that information, sometimes spits it out from the cart directly. You could actually plot them. I know we've talked about metabolic flexibility and these crossover plots, and those are usually generated from a VO2 max test where you can plot fat oxidation versus carbohydrate oxidation. And that's a great sign or a great signal of how healthy your metabolic or your mitochondria are, because your metabolic flexibility often mirrors your mitochondrial health. That's one option. You could do a field test or an at-home test. So they have all kinds of these. You could Google them. A website that I really like, it's a great resource, is xrx.net. There's a Rockport walk test where basically your goal is to walk a mile and you record the time, heart rate. I think there's some age and stuff related in there. It will spit out an estimate of VO2 max. There's a 1.5 mile test. There's a 2 mile test where the objective is run a mile and a half as fast as you can, record the time. So you have to have a known distance somehow. You have to have a timer of some sort, but your equipment needs are low. Or there's a 12-minute test. I tend to like the 12-minute test myself. I like to just know I'm going to run for 12 minutes. I'm not going to have to run any longer. And I just go as far as I possibly can. It works the same as the 1.5 mile or 2 mile run test. And the data ends up working out that, like, if you run, a little over a mile and a half to 2 miles in 12 minutes, usually your VO2 max is looking pretty good, pretty respectable. And they have all kinds of different like guidance that you can certainly you can look at age rate, age match, gender match, VO2 maxes to see where you stack up. You want to be in like the excellent or elite category as much as you can, factoring in time for family and work and like all the the various time constraints you might have. Those are a couple to just, I guess, keep in mind. With that data, you can then determine what you're going to do. So if you're feeling like your fat oxidation capacity is low and your mitochondria need to improve in their ability to utilize and burn fat, then you might want to emphasize some more zone 2 style cardio, might even lean into something like a fasted exercise to just really improve signal for burning more fat. Don't expect that you're going to be able to do the same amount of work per unit time when you're fasted. You have to kind of set your sights a little lower, especially if you're going to be going in the higher intensity range. But generally for the fasted stuff, you're better off kind of staying in that lower zone 2 style cardio. Anyways, VO2 max looks pretty good and you're kind of happy with how things are looking and you just want to ensure or optimize your mitochondrial health. You can do more of the high intensity stuff to really just push your mitochondria to like meet the energy need on that. You could do some interval type things where you're bouncing back and forth, right? So yeah, exercise I want to just hit on as probably your number one. And then we should chat about nutrition. I know you're a big nutrition advocate, Mr. Brandon.
I dabble. I mean, again, nothing really groundbreaking here, but anytime you can minimize processed foods, you can increase fruits, veggies, all those polyphenols are going to bolster those guys. It's not that complex. It's actually pretty dang simple.
Yeah.
Eat your proteins, eat your fruits, eat your veggies.
I tend to agree. Try to make your protein fit, which we're going to chat about. There's a bit of a teaser, but we're going to have an episode that's focused on protein, but make sure the protein you're getting, like, it's adequate. You're not deficient in protein. They've done a bunch of research on different nutrition paradigms, for example. Your nutrition paradigm, for the most part, is not going to be super important. It's probably going to be more important that you are doing what Brandon said, that you are focusing on minimally processed food instead of like the food like ultra processed products that are not quite foods, but food like products. Don't want as much of that. Protein intake, fiber, veggies, and then the fruits. Having a diversity of those, again, for the polyphenols in particular, that's super helpful on the mitochondrial side, mostly because the polyphenols have antioxidant capacity, and there's a lot of reactive oxygen species that are created. Actually, majority of the reactive oxygen species that your body experiences are created right there, where you're doing oxidative phosphorylation or aerobic metabolism in the mitochondria. So your mitochondria are constantly having to deal with reactive oxygen species. And you just want to equip it with the right tools to do so by eating enough polyphenols, antioxidants, etc. So the only thing I saw in the literature was a high-fat diet. I don't know, depending on how well they know us and if they've been following along as we shared bits and pieces of our history and our interests. High-fat diet is different than a ketogenic or a low-carb diet in some capacity, because the way the high-fat diets in the literature often are basically designed or built, they're 35% calorie or more from fat, total energy intake, but also plenty of carbs. So actually, when you read high-fat diet in the research, that's going to be something like a standard American diet, a Western diet. These diets that we know are both high in carbs, but also high in more of the fat content that would be suboptimal. Other than that, keto, low carb, Mediterranean diet, even Nordic diet, all of those paradigms seem to have positive effects in the research with varying degrees. It seems like the Nordic diet's a little bit a newcomer to the research area on the mitochondrial related outcomes. So pick your nutrition paradigm you like, stick to those main unifying principles around the processed food, protein, fiber, fruits, etc. Should be in good shape, I guess, on the nutrition side, and then layer in that maybe potential protocols. I don't know if you want to touch on any of those real quick. I know we have a couple episodes where we dove into some of this.
Yeah, I'd probably reference going back to what we talked about with like methylene blue and Alzheimer's or urolithin A when we chatted with Joe Lavelle. But
Wonderful.
again, these are things that shouldn't be the thing. Like there should be a foundational approach that's based in some kind of physical activity, some kind of foundational nutritional approach, and not just, take the pill and don't let the door hit you where the good Lord splits you when you're walking out the door kind of thing.
I love it.
All right.
What do you think? Close up, quick takeaways. What'd you like to do next?
Yeah, let's wrap this up. I think we hit the mitochondria pretty hard. They're pretty central to almost everything we care about: energy, aging, immunity. But if they're dysfunctional, you ain't getting any kind of ROI on your lifestyle longevity habits. Probably not functioning as well as they should be. So I you probably would recommend some kind of assessment. And I know, you don't have to empty the bank account. It could be like the Rockport test or the 12-mile test or the 1.5 mile test, and just kind of get a gauge on where your VO2 is. Use the Linus, the Pigpen kind of self-reflection questions. And how am I feeling? Am I slumping at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon? And all right, pulse test. Let's check in on it and, make a plan from there. And again, plugging us as part of the coaching team here at Healthspan, that's what we're here for. So any kind of protocol that you have or whatever you're taking, let's make sure that it's all working and you're kind of getting the most bang for the buck and getting the most out of this for whatever your health goals are and what's important to you.
I fully agree. Definitely, if you're in pursuit of longevity or optimizing your health span in any way, I think, at least from a health span perspective, we start at mitochondrial metabolic health being primary. If those are not in a good spot, then, like Brandon had said, some of your lifestyle longevity habits that you might be investing in, you might be spinning your wheels a little bit. So it's good to have a targeted approach there in terms of, like, you have, specific markers that you're targeting with regard to your mitochondrial health, then you can maximize that ROI. And as you add your new habits, as you kind of build in those adaptive stressors, whether it's fasting, exercise, different temperature therapy type stuff, sauna, cold, etc. As you do that, you're not overstressing the system. You're kind of doing it with the data in mind. We'd love to chat with you about that.
Yeah, whether you're a patient now or interested in becoming a patient, we are just twiddling our thumbs waiting to hear from you. Joking mostly, but reach out and, let's make sure that this is working as best as possibly can for you. We're here to support you. You pointed this out a little bit earlier, Rich, but next time we will be doing kind of a pretty deep dive with Dr. Jim Lanzalotti about protein. And so with that said, kind of the sign off. Thank you guys all for hanging around as long as you might have today for this Beyond Healthspan podcast. Hope that you're walking away with some kind of new insights, maybe a little bit of inspiration for your own healthspan journey and for whatever health means to you. So if this episode did spark something for you, let's share it with a friend, drop us a comment, let us know what you want to explore next. We're always eager to hear from you guys. Here to build this community that's curious about living longer and better together, and we're glad that you are here for it. So we will see you guys next time.
Thank you.